Emily Grunt Cares. I can't tell if this is a book or an organization. It says For Learning Unsheltered. Let's see. Sonia Wright just read or is reading The Missing Mentor. I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to check it out. What else?
Awesome. Thank you everyone for contributing and putting in a few things in the check-in box. And we're going to do breakout rooms in a little bit, and we'll have more time to do another kind of connection when we get there. So I'll hand it off to Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to welcome everyone again. It's so great to see so many people joining us through Zoom today. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the very top of the meeting right now, welcoming you and introducing you a little bit to the OLC and what we do here, as well as setting the context for our forum today. It's a little bit different than some of our other quarterly events that we've had in the past. So those of you who've been with us for a while, you'll notice that some things are different, but some things are very similar. So like all of our events, we will have an opportunity to learn some things together, process a little bit, and discuss and make those connections and think about the work going forward by the end of the meeting. One of the things that's a little bit different about today is that we'll be spending a pretty significant amount of time together in some breakout rooms later on. We're really excited about this. It's a little bit different of a format than we've used before, but we really think it'll give everyone a chance to not only get to know each other and make some of those connections and even network a little bit, but also really dig into some of the work that we're hoping people will do today. So we're gonna jump right in and get started. Before we wrap up at the end of our session, we will be putting up a poll. So we would love your feedback at the end, and it's an anonymous poll that we'll have you do before everyone signs off. So stay tuned. All right, so just a couple of quick sort of housekeeping. We will be recording this, and we will be posting our slides, our agenda, any relevant documents that we talked about today, and the recording to our website by the end of the week. So you'll be able to log in and see that anytime. We will also be referring to our agenda throughout the day or throughout the morning. We can share it in the chat box for you. It's a Google Doc. So when that link pops up in the chat box, then go ahead and click on that agenda and you can follow along with us as you go. If you can't access it for whatever reason, or you don't want to be looking at a Google Doc this morning, that's okay too. You don't have to. You can trust us that we're going in order. And again, keep yourself muted as much as possible during presentations. We'll be hearing from a couple different people today, but we will have lots of time for conversation in breakout rooms later. So, so let us know if you have any tech issues or any issues at all going forward. All right. Oops. Okay. And I think I will hand it over to Sanam to dive into our objectives. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sanam. I'm one of the co-directors at the Oakland Literacy Coalition. So I'm going to share with you just really quickly what we're hoping to achieve today. You can read this. I won't read it out loud, but I wanted to just set some framing for what we're going to do. And our big goal for today really is we are going to hear from OUSD about their new framework, the strategy, and they're piloting their new ELA curriculum. But what we really want to talk about is, what it takes for change, acknowledging that we historically haven't made the changes and the kinds of gains we want to make. And I say we as in all of us. So for those of you who've been with the OLC journey from the beginning, we set out many years ago to see that all Oakland third graders were reading at grade level by 2020. We're in 2021 and we are not there. So we're really acknowledging that it is that change making has not happen from all of us, from where we are at the scale we want to see. Not to say we haven't impacted lives, and many of you haven't done incredible work as educators and leaders. But what does it really take for us to think about what has held us back and what we need to do differently to move forward? So our conversation today is really centered around that piece. And we are going to spend time in breakout rooms. And we're going to share a really brief kind of framework. It'll be familiar to a lot of people. But the idea of that is really for us to think about what are the pieces that we can as a community, as a city, being citywide initiatives to scale, can do and need to do, and how do we need to move and operate differently? And our hope is also that when we do that, have that conversation and share that it gives us each something to take back to. We're not going to answer all our how do we make sure this initiative is successful this time is not something we're going to do in the next hour. But what we do want to do is make sure that we also can each walk away with a way to look at those questions around big, complex change. And how can we even do some of that in our own program? So Rebecca, if you want to skip me ahead to the next slide. Our premise is really around this quote, right? That, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And so we know that there are going to be so many things where we go, we never get this right. It feels so hard. And that is true. And we also don't want to gloss over the fact that there are very real barriers in our way to seeing the outcomes for children and families that we want to see. But we want to operate today from that place of possibility, and that every day we come to this work knowing that there is the possibility to do something different. But yes, it requires something from each of us, and it requires something from us as a collective. And you can skip one ahead. So we're going to use the 6-circle model today in our conversation after you hear about OUSD, but I wanted to present this at the beginning so folks can kind of have a moment to start thinking about where these things lie. I think at our January meeting last year, when we talked specifically, we also talked really around like early literacy and a lot around the data and what are we doing, the Literacy for All campaign. And I think it was Michael D'Souza, who at the time was with Educate 78, now just with the Oakland Reach, who actually first started talking about the 6-circle model. And someone can correct me if that's wrong in the chat box. So we're really pulling from this framework to look at these are the parts when we talk about complex change. We're not talking about the usual types of change that get us through things. But the complex change requires these 6 areas of work being paid attention to. And typically, I could say we focus on the top one. And yes, so we are pulling this from National Equity Project, who actually borrows the 6-circle model originally. I think it's Margaret Wheatley and some other folks who created the first one, but you'll see the worksheets we use are actually the NEP with permission worksheets. But we really wanted to talk about, and a lot of what OUSD is going to talk about, I think, is going to center us above the circle, right? Like, we know we need structures and processes and patterns in place, right? And typically in our programs and our organizations, if we're running whatever we are doing, we know how to, we come up with a strategic plan. We know that we need to have a certain amount of attention to our inputs and what are we going to do and what is the structure and the process we're going to put in place. And let's just make sure we execute this plan with fidelity and we'll see the outcomes we want. And that works a lot of the time. It works for, starting up a program often. It works for, implementing organizational change at some level. But we're talking about a different kind of change. And so what we want to make sure we are talking about today is what is referred to as the below the green line. And it's these 3 pieces around our relationship, the information we have, and our identities when we come into the work. So it's really about that, all the things that lay those conditions for the success above the green line. So I wanted, as we go into hearing from OUSD today, to start us off, our approach with hearing from them is they actually are going to share other opportunities for folks to get more info on the strategic plan, to give feedback, and to go deep. There's no way in this time we're going to hear every detail and ask every question about how they are doing things. But we're looking at their presentation today as naming an opportunity, not the only opportunity we're going to need to make a big, wide scale change, right? Getting a good curriculum and a good strategic plan in place are critical. And what are the other pieces that each of us bring to the table and each of us can do to support that process? So as you go into hearing about that, we're thinking about what overall, when we think about change initiatives, has or hasn't happened in the past in the way that we've needed them to? What has been missing? What have we not gone right? And as we look at OUSD's conversation as one way to think about tackling this problem as we move forward, what are the pieces that we need to align from that below the green line to make sure we support that work? So again, that's kind of just our initial framing for getting started today. And we'll be spending a good amount of time in our groups in conversation about what those things actually mean when we talk about new avenues for change. So I will go ahead and pass it back to Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Sanam. So I'm very excited to introduce you to our two presenters today. Mike and Romy are both from OUSD, and you can see their very extensive bios here. What I am very excited about is that both Mike and Romy are bringing a lot of rich experiences to their perspectives here with us today, and they'll each be telling us a little bit about the process that OUSD is going through to rework their literacy framework, their strategic plan, as well as the new curriculum that they're piloting this year. And they both have lots of valuable experience, as you can see in their bios, but they also bring a wide variety of perspectives to this work. And it's been a real pleasure working with them in the process so far this year. So without taking up any more of their time, I will turn it over to Mike, and I will let them start us off. So I'm going to stop my screen share. And Mike, you can take over.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see all of you. Or actually, I think I need to go through 4 screens to see everybody, but it's great to be here. So I'm going to start out by just talking about a new framework for thinking about language and literacy instruction in our district that we've been developing for, I think, about 1.5 years now. And I've been kind of the lead writer on it, and it's still evolving, and we're pleased to share it with you today. And there'll be an opportunity for you to give feedback too. Although probably later after you've had a chance to sort of look through it, because it's a bit dense. So I kind of want to give a high level look at it first. And so let me, I better share my screen for a sec here. And let's go into present mode. So it has sort of 3 pieces to it. And at the center are texts and tasks that are standards aligned and engaging for kids, because what research shows is that the actual things that are doing and the types of texts kids are reading are what and writing and listening and speaking about are the most predictive of achievement and just sort of their whole sort of almost attitude or disposition about learning and literacy. So that's the core, is making sure that every day kids are having these very high quality text and task experiences that are guided by the standards in our framework for in California. And then to make sure that those tasks are really hitting the mark, we have these 4 essential components that are around the outside that inform the planning and choosing and also implementation of those tasks. So on the left, you see this systematic instruction and foundational literacy, which is phonemic awareness, systematic phonics that goes in a certain order, fluency. So all of these really important practices that tend to happen in kindergarten and 1st grade, but need to be available for any student that is has not mastered those pieces. And then as you go around the circle, you see the content units, which are grounded in complex text sets. So that's the whole idea, that kids will be studying something interesting for a while, and there'll be a group of written texts but also often non-written text too, like video or storytelling and things like that, that will be supporting that work. And the kids will have multiple chances to encounter these difficult texts, multiple readings, strategies for helping kids access the texts no matter where they are, and build up their language and literacy over time. And then related to that, if you go across the circle, you'll see the designated and integrated ELD. Those are two approaches called out in our California ELA ELD framework, which is designed to guide our instruction. And they, the integrated ELD is the explicit teaching of language all day long related to your content. And it does lean on things like what's the language of science that we need to be doing? What's the language of a narrative that we need to be doing when we're in English language arts? Things like that. Are kids talking with each other and with, or just talking at all to sort of support their learning in literacy, because we know that student talk's very important. Are there different entry points in terms of visuals or charts for students? So, and then there's a designated ELD, which is the English language development ELD. That's just a real special time where you're working at your level to really understand how English works. So, you know, how do we begin a story? What's the types of languages we use to begin a story, to really be working at your level so that you can understand that. And then finally, assessment and differentiation over on the right, which is so important for finding out where kids are and what they need to know next. So what are your assessments and how are you making instruction different for kids based on their needs for part of the day? So as you can see, a lot of the time the kids are together because that's the content units and complex text, for example. But when you're talking about assessment and differentiation, you're talking about a time where you're really focusing on specifically what kids need. And then to support the text in the middle and these essential components, we have these equity practices around the outside. So one on the right, you have disrupting deficit thinking, which is confronting directly the way that sometimes we think of kids as not being ready for grade level work, and having them in a place where actually they're never going to get ready because we keep giving them content that's too easy. So that kind of all goes back to the providing the grade level text and task and supporting it with the practices. And it's the disrupting deficit thinking is essentially about as you engage kids in the grade level content, how are you leveraging the assets that they bring? What is the cultural and linguistic assets to move to the next one that could be really brought into the classroom to help kids feel connected and own the classroom and feel excited about learning and really engaged. And then the other one, nurturing and empowering narratives. When we think of narratives, that's just sort of the story that we tell about ourselves or others tell about us and what we believe about where we are and where we've come from. So the empowering narratives practice is the idea of really creating space for kids to tell the story of their families, their communities, themselves, so that they feel powerful instead of othered or described in a way that makes them feel that they're not fully members and owners of the classroom. So that was a little bit of a whirlwind through all these elements. I apologize, but I thought that what we could do is on the next slide, we could have a brief Q&A in the chat. And Cassie, are you kind of taking care of the chat? It seemed like you were doing that.
Yeah, I can help with that.
So again, once you go into the draft OUSD language and literacy framework, you'll see a lot of text. You'll see sections for each of these pieces: the standards-based text and task, the blue circle of the essential components, and then the equity practices. We call it a draft because we are making sure that we really check in with different communities. For example, a teacher noticed something missing in our foundational instruction, our systematic instruction and foundational literacy. And Roby Trigg Smith and I had a little chat about it and made some changes. So we're really trying to get the input of the community. At some point, I'm going to have a list of whatever the 36 different sort of encounters that we've had. But for right now, maybe I could just ask a few questions briefly and then invite you to later dig into that. Maybe find a section that you're specifically interested in and give some feedback by filling out this little form. It says, see here to give your feedback on the framework. You can do that more than once too. So I will stop talking and maybe there are some questions or comments in the chat.
Not yet.
And just so everyone knows, we'll be sure to share these documents from OUSD. We'll be sure to share it in our wrap-up email that everyone will get this week, as well as our website. So it'll be easy to link to all of this, and you can take a minute to look at it and then give some feedback. That'd be great. Thanks.
I guess I could go just briefly to here. This names some of the changes that are different because we did have a framework called Balanced Approach to Literacy previously. And some of the practices are similar, but these things that I just highlighted, and I'll try to make bigger now. So a focus on these things, equity and setting the conditions for learning was a big new piece. A systematic approach to foundational literacy. Sometimes it was in school, sometimes it wasn't, but we have a big focus on that in our initiatives. And then you'll hear Romy talk about that soon. And then explicit language and literacy instruction and grounded in complex text sets. Our current piece, our current curriculum, for example, is more focused on reading at your level. So there are some complex texts, but they're not really done every day, and they aren't in these sets. They're more like models. And then culturally sustaining text and literacy approaches. So again, trying to get those equity practices happening so that we are really including students, families, and communities in the classroom, and leveraging the knowledge and the engagement that comes with that. And then of course, the integrated and designated English language development from the framework from California. And then also the benefits of strong biliteracy programming, including the way these programs support higher levels of achievement for students.
Mike, still no questions, but Jenna Stoffer had a comment, which is
Sure.
that no question yet, but I really appreciate the equity frame around the exterior.
Thank you.
I think if it makes sense, maybe Mike, if you want to get into the chat and ask question. Oh, there might be a question right now.
Yeah, so Steve Hagler writes, can you talk a bit about professional development to support educators and community to build the skills needed to put this framework in place?
Yes, so the good thing about this framework is when I read people's comments, they often are thinking like, this is great talk, how are we going to walk that? So I think that's a super appropriate response. I first should say that the framework doesn't try to define all of that here. It's more like these things must be there. And then the next step is to have a strong professional development. There's a, I wonder if I can show that little thing here. It might not be, oh, I don't have that. The professional development has a few different aspects. And it has a foundational aspect. So say we're using a particular curriculum, we need to make sure that everybody gets the initial training for whatever the program is, be it math or whatever, but definitely for literacy. And then there's a kind of sustaining piece, and then there's a site embedded piece. So this this is super important and it's coming up a lot. And I feel that the central office is super committed to it. To just kind of give a quick answer. And there might, do you want to say anything more about that, Romy?
Yeah, I think actually maybe just moving into my presentation, I'm actually going to address a little bit of professional development.
Okay.
I think we're going to continue to think through, obviously the plan I'm sharing is just this year's annual plan, but we're going to have to, right, build out a strategic plan for the future years that includes just really critical thought on professional development. And then I did want to address just one of the other questions that came in, which is we're in virtual learning. How is this framework being implemented? And I think right now this framework is very much in draft form. We wanted to make sure that we had engagement with principals, with teachers, with our curriculum steering committees, with many stakeholder groups so that we could continue to get feedback to refine and make sure that we weren't missing anything as we really make sure this articulates what we want to see in instructional practice and assessment. So I think maybe I'll move on to my part, Mike, and you can continue responding to questions in the chat. Does that sound good?
Or, well, I can't if I'm projecting. So
Oh,
let's see, should maybe I hand the
I
projection
can
over
take over
to,
the screen.
yeah, go ahead. That's probably
Okay.
better.
Okay.
Yeah, Romy, you can just hop on in.
I
And
took
you
it
want me
over.
to respond in writing?
Yeah, in the chat. Awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, so I know that we're running out of time a little bit for our section in the presentation. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more succinct and not elaborate as much as I was going to. So hopefully I'm still pretty comprehensive. But one of the things that Rebecca and Sanam really wanted me to highlight was why this new strategy now, right? Those of you that were with us at our summit in December, we launched this Rooted in Reading Early Literacy Annual Plan, which is really what Sanam was saying. It's, you know, a lot of strategic practices that we want to see, especially from the district level, and then some things that we want to see as we build out partnership with our families and community partners. But I think for me, why the new strategy now, we're really going to ground in some data in the next slide that lifts up what Sanam was talking about, the need in student performance and just yes, the need not to continue the status quo, right? To move towards different practices at all levels. And then I think on top of that, just to see more alignment across our elementary sites. From a principal perspective, I felt really lucky. I was part of the early literacy cohort. We had 16 schools in our district that spent 4 years looking into the science of reading, the translation of that professional development into instructional practice assessment systems, but that didn't happen for our whole district. And so I think the articulation of this strategy and some of the things, the practices that we're doing within this is so important because we're trying to lift up some of that learning and do it across all of our schools to make sure that we're really moving in a direction all together with some strong consistency and alignment. Another piece for me is just knowing the need for a universal screener, right? An assessment system that was going to support us both with screening for dyslexia, but also strong diagnostic. So knowing even before our COVID context and the pandemic, that we were moving away from FMP and really looking for a whole assessment system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then a little bit of what Mike shared in our framework, knowing that we needed to think through our TK release second instructional practices and align those to the science of reading and not, you know, anything new, right? What our empirical research, our peer review research has really shown us for years, right? Since 2000 national panel, what we wanted to see in tier 1 instruction as well as tier 2 and tier 3 with these aspects that of course Mike already lifted up. So I'm not going to necessarily repeat them, but wanting to make sure we articulated and then of course supported with professional development, both curriculum agnostic and with attachment to some of our curriculum. So I hope I'm not going too quickly. Yes, I mentioned this. Like for me, a lot of the PD that I've been doing this first half of the year with leaders, with teachers, with some of our early lit tutors has come back to, right, what I see as our need, our data, our student performance. And of course, this is 18-19, this is 3rd grade ELA SBAC, but for me lifts up just where we need to move the needle. right? You see on the screen, and of course, I've only highlighted 2 buckets. Mike and I were talking about, I highlighted these 2 buckets, of course, because they're the majority of our students, if you look at the numbers, but there's disproportionality across some of our subgroups. You still see our Native American and our Pacific Islander just not reaching the proficiencies we want in 3rd grade. Not even a third, right, of these kiddos in the subgroups showing proficiency. And for me, that really points not necessarily to 3rd grade, even though this is 3rd grade data, right? That points to what we're doing in TK through 2nd. Putting my principal hat back on, we always talked about prevention, right, before we get to intervention. And we can spend a ton of funds and efforts in 3rd grade and above to intervene where students are showing that they have need. What we really need to do is focus in on the TK through 2nd years to make sure that we don't need to play that catch up. And so I think this really for me is the why. And so some of the practices, I was hoping maybe Mike, you could drop the full link. The Early Literacy Annual Plan spells out a lot of practices, but I just wanted to lift up what I really see as some of the new in this strategy, in this plan. And for me, it's a little bit of that PD that someone lifted up, the foundational training, right? We know in order to maybe do differently, we need to know differently. So we need that professional development. And I see that professional development as twofold, right? We have been doing a lot around SIPs, right? This is systematic instruction and phonological awareness, phonics and sight words, really making sure that we have professional development so that teachers can implement a component that we haven't seen maybe as built out in some of our literacy instruction, with a ton of professional development and training around that, as well as curriculum agnostic. So we started our whole year with both teacher and leadership training, really focused on frameworks. We talked through Scarborough's rope, what we really need to produce a skilled reader, Scheffelbein's framework, the discrete components of instruction and assessment. We've talked about the simple view of reading, right? Why we need that language comprehension and that complex text and that language development, both integrated and designated, as well as why we need a strong block for decoding. And so really spending some time around the science of reading. We've really tried to support an assessment system, and this effort was, of course, planned before pre-pandemic. No one, I think, anticipated that we would still be in distance learning as long as we have, but we wanted to move, right? Despite the context, we still wanted to move to a different assessment system. So we've been supporting both with administration, data analysis around iReady that gives us data around some of those discrete components, phonics, phonemic awareness, sight words, vocabulary comprehension. On top of that, though, and I think that gets less dialogue because iReady has been very new and a big system, is also my team, which is new to the district, right? A central position supporting early literacy, as well as some coaches, some support around supplemental assessments, specifically fluency subtests that are so important as predictive measures that aren't measured through iReady, through this amazing new platform that we created in August to house a lot of that information. So I was going to go into a little bit more detail, but I'm going to kind of move through because I know we want to get to our curriculum adoption processes as well. So some other new pieces of our strategy this year is that I think Sanam lifted, right? We need to talk through how we build relationship, these things that we're doing below the green line, but we need spaces in order to do so, right? So one of our new initiatives is hosting what we're calling literacy and family workshops every other month, where we are collecting community partners, we're collecting families, we're collecting educators in a space so that we can align around our intentions and our goals for kiddos, but we can also do some co-learning, right? So our next, and we're doing a little bit of plugging here, our next family workshop and summit, we're gonna be unpacking our academic milestones, which we co-created with OLC actually, and talking about, right, what are these goals and benchmarks that we have for kiddos throughout the year, but then also how do we support strategies that parents can do at home while we're working towards these. Of course, the milestones also being a new product that we pushed out this year to kind of support. I do feel, I'm going to talk a little bit in the next slide, so I'm going to move through. What for me is most exciting about this plan and some of the work we're doing this year is just the momentum, right? I feel like we have so many people really, right, thinking through what our data shows, but not, right, the third through eighth strategy. I know from a principal, we can often get really honed in to those kind of testing years, but the momentum across the city is really in our early literacy, right? Our TK through second and what we do to support with so many different groups thinking about this. And I think for me, what's really exciting is, and the science of reading isn't new, right? But we're lifting it back up. And discourse continues to be in like so many webinars that I attend, or even talking to the Oakland Reach about, right, how their learning hubs are really moving kids. We come back to the science of reading and what it's telling us we need to do to serve our kiddos. And then partnership, I have been blown away. I've only been in this role, right? I lifted my head up from Greenleaf Sand as principal, and I've met with OLC several times. I've met with Ed 78, with, you know, Rainin, with the Rogers Foundation, with so many different Oakland Reach, and not just about check-ins, right? It's about strategy and like what we can do together. And I think that is just incredibly powerful. And resources, right? We are also thinking through how can we divert like funds and, you know, like the Curry Foundation, books, right, to our kiddos. So thinking through how we can put resources behind this effort. I'm not going to speak a lot about COVID. We all know the challenges of teaching online, but also assessing online. And I think it's really played into our strategy, right? Trying to support SIPs is one thing. We're trying to support SIPs over Zoom is another. I think Sanam addressed a little bit of this, right? Whenever you're trying, right, to shift instructional practice, or you're trying to shift assessment practice, it's not just the technical pieces, right? It's thinking through that messaging and the adaptive as well as the technical. Like, what are we doing to really, what does Michael D'Souza say? Like, pull on heartstrings, right? And like invest everyone in the why. And I think that's one of the challenging pieces. If we're not in a room together, it's also a different thing for me to sit in space and try to invest folks in that why. For me, I think also just like principal lens, I turned into principalship from assistant principal, and we were retaining 50% of our teachers. And I think if we like magnify that out, I don't know where we are across the district now, but just that has so many implications for how we have to continue to train and support our teachers that are new, continue to do science of reading, continue to do foundational training that I think we need to combat. And then for me, our biggest levers, teachers. Right? We all know what our teachers do in their instructional minutes with kiddos matters so much. And some of our new teachers didn't necessarily get all of the training we wanted to in their prep programs. And so we really need to think through how do we support with professional development, but not just PD, right? The supporting, the observation, the feedback, and all of those systems to support them. Curriculum, and Mike's going to talk about this, that foundation for what we do and what teachers do in the classroom is referencing back a curriculum that has strong complex text, that has the very sequential, systematic foundational skills. And then family and community partnership, as we, I just think I have so many examples from Greenleaf of when we are really in space with our families and talking about our collective goals, then we galvanize around them and we have co-understanding, and then we talk about the barriers to those goals and we talk about what we need to meet them. So I think for me that's one of the biggest levers, and I hope to get some feedback from you all too on the plan, but I'm going to turn it over to Mike because I'm not aware of time, and I hope I've left you enough.
Thanks so much, Romy. A lot of what you said, you covered a bit of mine. So I'm going to do a kind of a brief overview of the ELA curriculum adoption process. And there are some great questions in the chat that maybe maybe you could kind of turn your attention to those, Romy, because they seem specifically related to what you were talking about. And then I can just get on with our next piece here. So let's see, let me share my screen and let's see. Right. All right, so we are in the process of adopting a new ELA curriculum, and the reasons are here. We needed a better foundational skills approach than was provided with the Lucy Calkins curriculum, and some of that work is sort of already in process, but we haven't formally adopted some of these materials that we're using along the way. We needed better grade level text and grade level activities and constant work on that, not just with a mentor text now and then. And then clearer, stronger language learning for English language learners and all students. Trying to utilize our cultural assets and diversity to help students learn, having that really be a part of the English language arts curriculum. And then fully supporting biliteracy development and bilingual programs. So those are some of the reasons. Additionally, of course, as this slide we've already seen, we're not getting the results that we want with our current approach. So I just want to say that some of this is going to be sort of reference slides because I don't want to bog us down too much. But basically what we did was we started a steering committee, which is composed of 3 subcommittees, and we want to make sure we really covered these different areas. So you can see there's a foundational literacy and dyslexia committee, which is co-chaired by Romy actually, and then a teacher named Kelly Hayter from Piedmont. And then the complex text and task committee, which is co-chaired by Jamila Sanchez and Sarah Norris, 2 coordinators that work in the central office. And then ELS and cultural responsiveness, which is English language learners, and just looking at materials to make sure they really leverage and bring in the culture and language of our students. So you can click into these little indicators and see the many indicators we're looking at carefully to decide whether a curriculum really meets what we're trying to care about or not. There's a list of the K-5 ELA steering committees and members at that link, which if somebody could drop that in the chat, that might be interesting. And then this is also an opportunity for more parents to become involved in this parent study group, which is a group that goes kind of deeper into the indicators and what's going on in the committee and tries to give some feedback to the steering committee to make sure that the families are really being taken into account. Are there some chats right now that maybe I should answer quickly?
Mike, we actually are over time. So
Okay.
if there's questions, what we'll ask is when we go into breakout rooms, have you and Romy stay and chat responses, because I think we're a bit over.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a quick overview of things we've done. Again, with this sort of pink or purple thing on the bottom, you can click that and get more involved. This FAQ on the steering committee really gives you a full overview of what we're trying to do with this process. And then this is a little list of things that we hope will happen because of adopting and fully supporting the implementation of a new curriculum. And with that, I think it's time for chat rooms. Am I right about that, Simon?
Becca, are you there?
Hi, sorry about that. I had a little technical issue unmuting myself. Yeah, so we are going to jump into some breakout rooms in a minute. And the way this is going to work is you are actually going to be able to choose your own breakout room, which is very exciting. And these are the different breakout room options that we have. We have, 1 second, it is loading. So we have 3 different options. We'll have 4 rooms, but we'll have 3 different topics to address today. One is advancing change at the school level, so the school site level. And this is really ideal for people who work in organizations that directly serve students in literacy, or if you're very interested in how that literacy strategy, how it intersects with teachers, students, and curriculum in your work. And then those of you who are interested in advancing change at the family or community level, so this is sort of ideal for people who work in organizations that connect directly with families, or who work in the field or in a field who are interested in how literacy growth and family engagement and community engagement intersect with each other. And then the final category that we have today is advancing change at the system level. And so this is really ideal for people who work in organizations or government, for example, that are really invested in that student success on a broader level across and within systems and how those interact with each other. So you all will have an opportunity to choose your breakout room. And the way this works is when I open them up, you'll be asked to select one. And so you just go to the room that you select. If you, for some reason, cannot select your own breakout room, that's not a problem at all. You can do two things. You can either change your name in Zoom to the number that you'd like to be assigned to, or you can just chat us and we'll assign you to the number that you choose. You can just put it in the chat box. So either one of those two ways, if you for some reason can't choose your own room, then do those. In the breakout rooms, each breakout room will be facilitated by an OLC staff member who will take notes and guide you through some discussion questions in the breakout room. And then we'll reconvene together and do a quick share out from each room just to hear sort of a high level things that you guys discussed and anything that came up. Just an FYI, we will be compiling responses. You'll see we're using this tool called Padlet, which is pretty cool. We'll have those available after the fact, but we'll also compile these responses and summarize it for our community so you can see, what are people thinking about? What are people really wrestling with? How is this work, being framed in different ways? So let's jump into this. Oops. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I'm excited to hear a little bit about what you all discussed in your breakout rooms. So for the way this will work is your facilitator will share a little bit about what you discussed, any of the big picture takeaways, and we'll just start with room number 1. So Sana, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I'm actually going to just drop our Padlet in the bottom so folks can look at one another's Padlets if you want as well. But we were in the room with our school base, so folks who are either serving at or just thinking from the perspective of kind of the school unit and school based. And most of the comments were around our transparency and information being really critical, as well as authentic kind of engagement and who we listen to, and also moving from just the planning process to actually time and intention around the actual implementation and what it looks like. But a lot of the comments around transparency, also about what the failures have been as well as the successes.
Great. Thank you. All right, and room number 2, if you'd like to take it away.
Okay, and I also just shared our Padlet in the chat box. So one thing that came up for us was, I think, a general sense of frustration that after, that we have generations of different curriculum interventions, and still we have, far too many who are not at grade level, who cannot, not able to read. So I think there's a sense that we need to have more adult literacy programs in place and to have more parent partnerships in place. So to really emphasize that parents are kind of the key partner in enabling anything that we try to do at the school level with curriculum. And that, and that means creating partnerships that are really based in where parents are. So understanding where parents are culturally, linguistically, and not using terms that are barriers, using words like reading instead of literacy. But really setting kind of mutual expectations with parents that they have a job to do as well. So that is what we talked about. Also just, I think generally feeling like a lot of the models that we're using are not current, and that they're based on an older understanding of children, and that, we can leverage technology and the way kids are learning in a much more sort of modern way that recognizes, you know, maybe smaller bits of information that to kind of reflect what children do with their apps. So that's it pretty much.
Great, thank you, Jethro. Room number 3, Cassie, take it away.
That was me, and I've dropped our room 3 Padlet into the chat box as well. For us, a lot of what we talked about in terms of the barriers were around the sort of the district and our community taking on kind of too many things and going in too many directions and not feeling like there was a unified or consistent approach to really investing in literacy. Another barrier is really around the trust, trust of each other, trust in the system, and the trust that it takes to really do what is really hard work to take on something new and actually move beyond the status quo that's comfortable and familiar. I think some of the opportunities that we named were really around how, and I think this has come up other places as well, but really about how do we center parents and parent expertise and leadership and power as authentic partners and not, you know, merely as like parent engagement in the way that it's often done. Some of the other pieces were really around just like, how are we doing the below the green line of building buy-in kind of from the start in terms of whether it's teachers or the union or parents, but really making sure we're attending to people feeling like there is a unified goal and understanding of why we're doing this really hard thing, so that we have the courage to actually take on the risks of the change that needs to happen. Yeah, and I will stop there. You can all take a look at the doc.
Awesome. So I was in room 4 and we were the continuation of family and community. And so within our group, it was awesome because we were also joined by an Oakland parent who asked a really great question. From her perspective, she wants to be exposed to everything that's going on in the classroom, the books, you know, what are they reading? But the biggest question was, do parents have access to the curriculum? And so I wanted to make sure I brought that back to the whole because we were unsure, and I figured I had enough expertise within the general grouping to answer that question. The other thing that we really hit on was we have a lot of people who do out of school time programming, and that is an underutilized resource. We talked about the fact that when you have the out of school time people are generally the connection between schools and families. And so it makes sense to continue to add them to the professional development when you think about literacy, because they're the ones who are going to have fresh eyes on the young people after school. And then they're the ones communicating with parents because pickup is usually at 6 p.m. So we're able to see that there's like a general undervaluing and how we should use them more, because this is also an alignment with being able to, when we think about change this big, we want to be able to bring every powerful entity to the table, and out of school time is one that we're not using. The other thing we talked about was just like teacher buy-in, and how are teachers feeling when every week there's something new that they have to be trained on. And then they're like, okay, well, next week it's something else. Where, like Cassie said, trust is an issue, and people are being, starting to feel a bit jaded, like, okay, it's this week and, next school year. So, and added my Padlet to the chat.
So I put in the chat what we're going to send. We're going to be sending images. We'll download an image of all the Padlets so folks can browse through those. We will also send you resources where you can go deeper and look at the 7-circle model and how it might help you in creating, again, if you're looking at organizational change for yourself, if you're looking at how your program can support some of this work, even if it's to the benefit of curriculum adoption or any of these other pieces. But what are the practices that each of us can also be doing, and the types of questions we can be asking when we're embarking on our own change work as well, is kind of where we hope to go from there. And Jethro also already has downloaded all the books that you all are reading, so it can be kind of a shared recommendation list that's already going around, and you can access that. And I will hand it off to Rebecca.
Right. So I just shared a poll that will give us lots of great feedback. It only has 3 questions, so it won't take you very long. But before you log off today, we'd love to get your feedback on how things went today. And sorry for the background sound. And our final slide I'm going to share is just some wrap up closing information. And we, I think, had mentioned a few times that OUSD is having their another literacy summit on February 18th. I encourage you to hop on for that, and we'll send out the information about that in our post-meeting information. And we also want to encourage you, if you have any updates about your organization, about your program, if you're hiring, if there's anything you would like the greater community to know, go ahead and drop it in the chat box if there's anything that you'd like the community to know about. And we'll try to reshare on social media and in our community as well. And as you're finishing up the poll, I want to just thank everyone for being here with us and jumping into this work today. I know it was a little bit different than some of the things we've done in the past, and I really appreciate everyone's willingness to jump into those breakout rooms and really spend some time in there. And also thank you for your patience with this very noisy small coworker that I have here. Yeah.